You're listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with host Doc Martin. Stay tuned in or call in. You won't want to miss what's happening next. How do you step into your maximum potential? How do you connect your spiritual drive with your physical path? Stick around as Doc Martin takes listeners on a journey through the seen and unseen, the accepted and the unbelievable. Get ready to meet the maximum you the world needs on Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin now. Hi, everyone. I'm Doc Martin. You're on Maximum Medicine Radio. And once again, I'm so lucky to have my good friend, my teacher, my mentor, Dr. Carl Greer here with us from his home in Illinois. And we're going to be talking about his new book, The Necktie and the Jaguar. Hi, Carl. So happy you're here.
Nice to be with you again, Sharon.
So what we're going to talk about today, which I think is important for all of us, and especially those of us who watch the shows that are on the Transformation Talk Radio network, when you tune into any of the hosts, the whole purpose is to enrich our lives, to step into things that excite us, that bring us joy, but not just joy on the physical and mental level, but on the spiritual level. Carl, that's sort of the background, in a sense, of your book, to really bring into balance the mind, body, and spirit.
Yes, that's right. And in my book, I tried to show how my particular story made that, in some cases, easier than others, but in some cases harder. And I, at the end of each chapter, posed questions based on my own experiences that the reader might be able to relate to in their own lives.
So for all of you listeners, one of the things that Carl, I found as a teacher, is phenomenal at, and it comes from his years of being an organized businessman, but then also a Jungian analyst, and subsequently a shamanic practitioner, is that the best way to, and I'm going to speak for you, Carl, correct me if I don't have it right, but the best way to lead anybody into new behaviors, new things, is to offer them a question to ponder and leave them the choice to determine it themselves. That's a very, shall I say, a process or a philosophy that really allows for the sovereignty of each person, which I love. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm. As a physician, sometimes I struggle with that because people come and they're also culturally sort of indoctrinated to think the doctor knows best. And if you're asking me my medical advice, I do know more than the patient usually, but I've tried over time, and I've learned with Carl's help to say, here's how I see it, but here's another approach, and here's a third approach, what works for you. And I've found over time that that's led to, first of all, the patient becoming involved, which I think is critical. When we're talking about changing our lives, patients, when they face a health challenge, really have to change. We have to take responsibility and dig in order to change. So I thank you, Carl. I learned a lot of how to do that from you.
Well, thanks for that. I continue to try to learn to do that for myself. And I believe that in addition to our ability to access good information about our health and other things out there, that we have an innate wisdom unique to our own bodies that we can tap into. And as you have well experienced to know, that inner healer, that inner wise person is accessible. And oftentimes it might have an answer for a person about a particular problem, say a particular health problem, that would be very beneficial for them to tap into. Equally as important in many cases is getting a prescription for a drug or a suggestion that they do something different in their lives.
Right. And more long lasting. If you as a patient, a client, someone looking to change, if you can go deeper inward and access those incredible forces, transpersonal realms, as you speak of them, that really brings you a richness in terms of resources to help you tackle any challenge.
Yes, and that has embedded in it the idea that each of us might have parts that want to change, but there may be other parts that don't want to change. And
Right.
those parts that don't want to change are often in our unconscious. And the things that I know you work on in your practice, I do as well. What are ways for people to get in touch with those unconscious parts of themselves so that they get that energy and the wisdom to consciously reflect on to see if that gives them an impetus to change?
Right. You know, it's interesting. I just finished training in hypnotherapy, which is another tool for me. It's another way to help the client access their subconscious, their inner wisdom. And one of the key approaches taken from, I forget the hypnotherapist's name, but I'm sure it's related maybe to Gestalt, or you would know better, some other therapy, is parts discussions. So in a
Yeah,
light trance in hypnotherapy, finding that part of yourself that has a real resistance, and even it's probably been simmering in your subconscious, but it's really got strength and it's got a hold on you. And in hypnotherapy, when you can get the client to talk to it and find out, and then the realization is there was a real reason once upon a time that that part had such strength and had such a barrier.
yes.
And then you go, aha. And then that ability to see it and then to incorporate it, you're right, that gives such access to such more power.
And people over time have talked about accessing these inner figures. Gestalt therapy, they talk about talking to the empty chair and having a conversation with the part that's personified in that chair. Jungian psychology talks about active imagination as a way to have a conversation with the parts. And you know that we've done dialoguing processes where we interact with inner figures that we encounter in our dreams, in our daydreams, or on a shamanic journey. So all these are ways to get information from sources that we traditionally, in our conscious mind, aren't necessarily availing ourselves of.
And I think that's what I love about shamanism, and we're going to talk more on the rest of this hour, is the recognition or the belief, and having then for me learned about that, and it felt right to me, it was easy for me to believe it, of those forces outside yourself, the forces that are universal to others and that have intelligence and that have wisdom. And then you can have a dialogue with the world bigger than you and ask for assistance, ask for benevolence at the very least, and really add a richness to your life. And that is, for me, one of the most fulfilling things, is to have a connection to the world outside myself.
Yes. And back to your initial comments about, starting points for people and their stories. Again, for me, being a Midwestern guy growing up in Pittsburgh and Gary with Midwestern values, the things we're talking about were not things that I grew up with as ideas. And
Right.
I was in a more practical world of if you're lucky, you go to college and then you get a job, but hopefully if you're lucky, you'll stay in that place for 50 years and you'll raise a family and come home most nights if you can between 5 and 6, and weekends maybe on a public fee golf course, play some golf, or you work in your yard and you retire, and life goes on, and you hope the same thing for your kids. So the idea of talking to transpersonal energies and so forth for those worlds is kind of spooky. And for me, it was a transition from those patternings to where I am now, where I believe in those worlds, I've experienced them, and to be able to share that belief with others who maybe continue or have grown up in the same kind of backgrounds that I did. That's been part of my calling, because I think for all of us to access those places can be transformative. It's just believing that for yourself, and then diving off and trying to, experiencing them. And I tried in my book to show how I had some experiences that got me from where I came from to where I am now. And it's as an 81-year-old, it's a long process.
A long journey.
Yeah.
I want to hear about those experiences in a minute, but we're going to take a short break. And I'm here with Dr. Carl Greer and talking about his new book, The Necktie and the Jaguar. When we come back, we're going to continue exploring things along his journey of how he landed up close and personal to shamanism and share that with you. We'll be back in just a minute. So everybody, we're back. I'm Doc Martin on Maximum Medicine Radio. I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Carl Greer. We're talking about his new book, The Necktie and the Jaguar, and how he went through his life searching for more, experiencing more, and having found places where he was able to open up to more soul fulfilling parts. He shares with you questions for you to do your own inner journey. So Carl, what I love about in your search, and I'll say the search for meaning, although that maybe is too generic an expression, but how, and you and I've talked about this often, how we experienced some of the powers and the intelligence in the unseen world. And having experienced it, how we are really hooked. Share a little bit, if you would.
Well, as I was saying in our prior conversation, the world that I grew up in did not spend much time talking about unseen worlds. I mean, it was a very concrete, literal Midwestern world. My dad was in the steel industry and worked for U.S. Steel. I spent summers working at different Homestead Works, Duquesne Works in Pittsburgh. And so I didn't have a familial introduction to these worlds. But my first remembrance, Sharon, of a big experience for me. I was about 5 years old. We lived in a suburb of Pittsburgh called Mount Lebanon. And at the end of our street, there was a small farm. And I remember as a young boy walking up to this farm. And when I got onto the property, I walked into it a bit, and there was an apple tree. And all of a sudden, that apple tree seemed to have an aura around it that was really transfiguring to me. I mean, it made me really stop. And I looked at it, and I felt a real connection to that tree and the aura, and then to the things around me. As a kid, 5-year-old, I didn't have words for it. It was a felt experience, and it felt really good. And after, I'm not sure how long it was, it kind of faded, and I walked back down the hill and got back into my life. But that was my first remembrance of kind of a otherworldly, transcending, transpersonal experience. And it kind of was a little blueprint within inside of me for the possibility that I'm part of a world bigger than me, that we're interconnected with energies that we can't see. So perhaps I had an impetus thereafter to search for that again. In any event, I did search for it again at various times in my life, and was fortunate enough to find it. Doing psychological work, working with dreams. I've had dreams where I've had similar kind of aha experiences that have been transformative for me. And doing shamanic work, with the medicine plants and without the medicine plants. So for me, those experiences have built upon themselves, and I've changed my worldview because of them, and I've changed what I do in the world because of them.
So one of the things that I met you through the Four Winds Society, Dr. Alberto Violdo's organization, and you talk in your book about when you were first connected to that, you felt a very strong draw. And I remember getting Alberto's book, Shaman, Healer, and Sage, and holding it up and looking at his picture. His face is there, Machu Picchu behind him. And something gave me a zing. I had a connection. I never met him. I hadn't read the book, but I knew that there was something important coming for me. And I want to talk briefly about the shamanism you and I have come to know, and how it does offer so much richness. And maybe talk a little bit about how you came to it and what benefits it brought to you.
I had been interested intellectually as a reader about Native Americans, medicine men and women, and shamanism and sorcery as described by Carlos Castaneda and Michael Harner, and books by people such as Lynn Andrews, IMO Storm. And in my 30s and 40s, I read those books and was interested in, what adventures they've had. Wouldn't it be fun to do that? But I had a family and a job, and I couldn't just take off and apprentice with anybody. But I did take it to a level where on my own, I did some journeying based on the stuff I read. And Michael Harner's book, I used drums and I used didgeridoos, tapes of those in order to get into an altered state to have an experience. And then I studied Kabbalistic traditions and ceremonial magic things. And just as a reader, I again never felt I could do anything much more with it until I too read Alberto's Shaman, Healer, Sage. I was in the Caribbean with my wife at the time, walking along the beach, and I started to have one of those experiences like I had as a kid, where I felt a oneness to the water, the sand, the air, the sun. And it kind of was a reaffirming for me, hey, this is something you need to pay attention to. And I then signed up for a school. And I went to a Joshua Tree, which is in California, in August, very hot. I'm a guy who's got a business background, clinical psychologist at that time. And I'm with mostly younger people, thinking when I came there that there was going to be a select group of 8 or 10 students at the foot of a master. There's probably 130 people. And
Mhm.
we started to do work with each other at the end of maybe the first day or so. And I thought, what in the world have I got myself into? Here I had boundaries in terms of, the way we do healing work and what we do. But I trusted the process. And it was a couple-week session when he had longer trainings than I think he does now. And at the end of it, I said, this is important. I'm learning certain things. And during the experiences, which are just opportunities for each of us individually to go to these transpersonal realms for ourselves and then do the work. I felt, there's really something of value here. And it was a place out in nature that was very important for me as well. Joshua Tree was kind of an interesting, just geographic place. So I came back, and ever since, I've been on that path. And since that time, I taught in his school, and I've been friends with Alberto. We've done things together, and I've spent many trips around the world working with other shamans. And I've done some teaching, as you know. It's been a big part of my spiritual connection, even though I grew up as a Christian and still practice. This has been a way that's gotten out of my own self-absorption, and I'm aware of the relativity of my life compared to the big picture. And I'm trying to find my place in relating to that big picture.
Mhm.
And it's all been ends, means to ends. And it's been very rich for me. And it's had many chapters in it. And I'm describing that one chapter that you and I shared, the Four Winds chapter, part of it.
Right. And just a quick note to our producer, Jamie, we will probably still take the break, but push it. It might stall a couple minutes. So Carl, there's two things that I want to comment on here. First is, I too was unbelievably drawn to Carlos Castaneda's books. I read them years ago. When were they? The 70s?
Could have been. I was reading them, I think, in the 80s, but
80s, okay. So anyway, and you said Carlos talked about sorcery, but I want people to stop. There's a very negative word connotation to the word sorcery. And from Carlos Castaneda's point of view, his teacher was talking to him about being people of knowledge and basically going to the source. So we're not talking black magic or negative stuff here. I just want to be clear about that. The other thing is what I found phenomenal about Alberto's teachings, and as my first real hands-on practicing of things, is when you do these processes, when you do these journeys, however you get yourself into the altered state, something happens, and when you experience it, there's no going back because you feel it. It is so real that it is as real as a mosquito bite on your arm. You can't ignore it. You can't ignore it. And I want to just tell a quick story here because there was the part of me that was a newbie, that was a scientist. I was a physician at the time going, you've got to be kidding. We were told to do a stone reading for a classmate. And we had 3 stones in our medicine bundle, which we call a mesa. We had 3 stones at that time. And we were supposed to tune in, be in a meditative state, tune into that stone, and literally tell that person whom I've never met before something about themselves that came from knowing the stone. The stone would tell you something and you would know. I'm like, first of all, I'm not that intuitive. Secondly, I don't know how to go into communication with the stone. Thirdly, I never met this person. You've got to be kidding. Well, I picked up this stone and it was kind of a green gray stone and it might have had a little bit of white in it, but I literally saw a boat on an ocean. And on this half of the stone was heavy rains and storm. And on this half, the boat was pointing to the direction where the sun was out. So I start telling the story of what I see. You've been on a boat in a horrible, horrific storm, topsy-turvy. You could have capsized at any moment. Everything around you is raining. It's horrible. It's the worst storm ever. You think you're going to die, but your boat is going into the sunlight. The storms are gone and you are safe and you're going to be okay. I'm thinking, what am I talking about? I'm like, well, this person starts crying. I'm like, okay, I'm really weirded out right now. And she said, that is so perfect. I had a dream the other night because my life is like being on that boat. I had a dream about it. Everything topsy-turvy, divorce, changed jobs, moved to another city. Everything was turmoil. I felt like I was going to drown. She said, I saw the boat. I was going to drown. I was on this rocky, shaky boat. She said, but I started to get a hint of things getting better. And I said, well, the stone says you're coming out of the storm. I swear to you, when I looked at that stone later in our week-long class and years or months later, there is not a single mark on that stone that looks like a boat or like the rain or like the waves. But when you have that kind of knowing and subsequently having that connection to a stranger that has meaning for them, and you're joined in an experience that is outside of your literal having just met them and sitting in a big conference room, you're changed forever.
Yes.
And you don't go back. So we're going to take a short break, but I just want to say one thing for everyone listening. These experiences, that's part of what I bring in each radio show, and that Carl has in terms of the exercises he'll lead you in his book, in the different chapters. When you do those, you have the opportunity to experience something deeper about yourself, something bigger about your abilities that you never knew you had. And life is no longer the same, and it's heading for a better place. So that's what I like about all this. And we'll be back in just a minute. All right, we're back. I'm here with Dr. Carl Greer. I'm Doc Martin. We're just starting to dive into what Carl's book is all about, is how do we make changes, especially when we're not fulfilled. Either if not, and usually that's not fulfilled, in Carl's case, searching for something deeper for his soul longing. So Carl, it's really hard to make change, isn't it?
It is hard, as you and I have talked over the years. The first step, which is also hard, is for somebody to really take an honest look at their lives and ask themselves, is it working? And give an answer that's not just the one they want everybody around them to hear or what they would like it to be, but honestly, what is their true story? And if somebody can do that as a starting point, then they can ask themselves, am I happy with it? And if they're not happy with it, then they have to ask themselves the follow-up question, what can I or should I do about it? And at that point, many people have a lot of reasons why they can't. I don't have the money, I don't have the time, you don't understand, I've got these obligations, and so on and so forth. But in addition to all those, I have found that, as we've also, you and I talked about, there's parts of us that just don't want to change. And if we can access those parts through our shamanic work, get their stories and work with them, it's a big resource. It does two things I found from a Jungian perspective, also from a shamanic perspective. some of these things that are inside of us, we don't want to interact with because we don't want to hear what they have to say. And it takes energy, life energy, to keep them down. And the paradox is that in many cases, when we listen to them, we let them speak, they give us energy. So there's a double potential whammy. We not only get more energy because we're not repressing things, but we gain energy from the thing that we before were trying to keep down, which gives us more energy to change if we want to, and to live our lives more fully. So that's been an important part of my own self-discovery and part of the teachings that I've tried to offer to people. How do you interact with those unconscious parts that are keeping you from doing what you'd like to do in your life so that you can make the changes that truly at your heart level you want to make?
So I have two thoughts about that. The first is, one of the things I've always used as my deciding factor is, so many times, as you said, I don't have the money, I can't do, or I will know because I have to this. And my biggest thing is, who said? Who made that rule? Who said? Why? Who, you say, well, I can't do that. Why not? Who said so? Mm-hmm. And when you are conscious enough to reflect that you yourself made that rule, or an experience that you had before, or a part of you that's simmering underneath made that rule, then you kind of, for me, I always end up laughing because it's such a foolishness. It's such a limiting foolishness. The second thing I want to reflect on, I want to talk some about this, because in shamanic work, we have power animals, and we find energy and information and wisdom from interacting with the spirits of different animals. And for me, in the shamanic training with the four winds, the Jaguar is a very important archetype. And of course, with me and my anxieties and need to feel protected, I didn't have just one, I had three. So I needed three to have the courage to move forward. But let's talk, Carl, share some stories of your experience with Jaguar, and Jaguar in relationship to the shamans you've worked with. And for me, Jaguar is such a powerful protector and an energy that can give you the courage to change.
Well, in mythology, the Jaguar is seen to be an energy that can go between the worlds of the living and the dead, the conscious and the unconscious. And in fact, in the literal world, it can go on the water, in the water, on land, it can climb. So it has a lot of things that it can do. And in the invocation that you and I both learned, when we call in the directions, we're asking it to protect us when we do work, to help us move beyond our anxieties and our fears when we do work in these transpersonal realms and when we die. So it's a big energy. And people encounter it in medicine journeys and in just non-medicine plant journeys as a very powerful energy. Sometimes it's fearsome to them, scary, and sometimes they see it as an ally and protector, all of which is an opportunity to establish a new relationship with it, to see if it's more than what it appears in that moment, which is part of the never-ending work. For me, I've had some very interesting Jaguar experiences. I was given by a shaman a stone that has in it the energy of a jaguar, the shaman who put it in there, and the energy of the stone. So this is kind of, when I heard that, stone, jaguar, shaman, all in this, so I didn't know what to make of that. But once during a ceremony, I had this stone in my hand, and it started to pulse, and his eyes started to move literally. And the shaman with whom I was working saw it. And both of us were wanting to protect ourselves, so we spritzed it. We used Florida water. We sprayed it to feed it, so it wouldn't be feeding on our energy bodies. But it was an example for me that these worlds are interacting with us, and sometimes we pierce the veils to see these interactions. Usually we don't, because it would be probably more disturbing than we would like. But that particular night, I had other interactions with that Jaguar. I was involved in some energetic tussles, and the Jaguar came to help me. I was involved with other people that had Jaguar energy. The shaman, I saw marks on his face that he had gotten from a Jaguar ceremony years ago. And a lot of things happened that just reaffirmed to me that these realms that we're working in are needful of respect, and they are very powerful.
So Carl, we have a few minutes left. I want to talk about specifically about your book and how you came up with the title. And tell us, does Jaguar have specific significance in your journey of change, or would it have help for someone who is looking to make significant changes in their lives?
Well, I came up with the title of my book, The Necktie and the Jaguar, because for part of my life, I was living necktie energy, and that is kind of a conventional, as I discussed earlier, Midwestern story. And for me, it became somewhat constricting, and I really didn't know what to do about that, other than starting to pursue an interest in psychology and then shamanism. But I learned, Sharon, that one way to help me make change was to connect to energies that I hadn't connected to before. And they could have been energies in my unconscious through dreams, or in the shamanic realm in doing shamanic journeys. And as you and I over the years have talked on those journeys, from time to time we encounter an animal, and we can learn to interact and converse and give to and receive from that animal energy. And for me, that in fact has been part of my story. So one particular night, I was working with a shaman, and we were trying to bring into our lives Jaguar energy, however that particularly might be for us, and also the energy of fire. And also, we were learning the lessons of masculine and feminine energies. To that end, we had logs in the fire. Some were masculine, some were feminine. We were doing clearing work with a masculine eagle feather and a feminine eagle feather. And then we were trying to relate to the energy of the Jaguar, which in Andean mythology has the power to go between the worlds. Literally, I think we've talked about this before, the land, the water, climbing, and more symbolically, the conscious and unconscious, and death and life. So in this particular ceremony, I was working with Jaguar energy, and I had the strong experience that I needed to make changes in my life, and that energy of the Jaguar would help me move from the necktie guy to something else. And that something else had not yet been formed, but it was an energy that I could gain strength from, the sense of protection and the experiences I had then with it and subsequent reminded me that a shamanic path for me was very important and that I really needed to be diligent in pursuing it.
How do you think anybody who is looking to step into something new in their lives, how could they start to work with Jaguar energy and use those components for helping them move forward?
I would suggest for somebody who wants to visit the transpersonal realms and get a source of energy and information that they hadn't had before, that they certainly could be open to an encounter with a Jaguar, but also be open to whatever they would encounter on such a journey. And for example, they don't even have to journey. This world of synchronicities and these acausal happenings is around us all the time if we're open to it. And we're often most available to it when we're in nature. So spend time, anybody who's listening or watching, in nature, have a question perhaps in your mind when you're going there, but don't be so intent on answering the question that you lose sight of just being in the presence of nature, and see what happens. And then you might get an image. It could be a jaguar, but it could be you might see a squirrel, you might see a chipmunk, you might see a rabbit, you might see a raccoon, you might see a bird. So then you're just kind of open to what is, and you might, based on what kind of catches your interest, ask that red robin. You're struck by its breast. Say, why am I noticing you right now? What message might you have for me? And then somehow, and this is the big move that we can all learn to do, but it's tricky in the beginning. Become that energy of the red robin and let it speak to you, the Carl or the Sharon that's conversing, and pay attention to it. And then come back to the Carl or the Sharon and then ask it another question. Okay, you're saying you're here to remind me of the importance of feeding. Maybe you're thinking of a robin feeding its young in a nest. And then maybe the idea of feeding comes to you through that interaction. And then you might ask more, well, feeding of what? And then all of a sudden you're going to get a sense of, are you feeding those who are important to you as much as you should, or yourself? And then you ask the robin. So you start to have a conversation that can give you information you otherwise wouldn't have had you not done it. And yes, it could be with the jaguar, but it could be with the wolf. It could be with the elephant. It could be with the butterfly. And learn to feel we're in this interactive world, that everything is interconnected in that world, and we can influence it and it can influence us if with intent and kind of reverence we choose to interact with it.
You know what I also really liked when we were training in the Four Winds, in the Andean cosmology, there's 4 major archetypes that we used around the medicine wheel: the serpent, the jaguar, the hummingbird, and the eagle. And we had to take at least a week, it was probably a month, and embody that particular energy. So if somebody wants to really understand jaguar, then you get pictures and put them up on your refrigerator, stand them, put them on your bathroom mirror. Think about what it's like to be a jaguar, and not just the most fearsome parts, because they're an apex predator. But think about the ability to sense in the darkness. And that to me brought out the intuitive sense. How
Yes.
do you know that there's a deer when you can't see it. And working with that, I used to practice, it sounds corny, but I live rurally. And so I would drive in the morning in the darkness, and often deer would cross the road. And as I said, because I had so much anxiety, I took on 3 Jaguars, but I put one of them, the big guy, on the top of the car. And I'm imagining this, and some people don't see, they're not clairvoyant, they sense, they feel, they know. I happen to visualize very well. And I had one on the left side of the car and one on the right side of the car. And I gave them a job every morning. And I said, watch out for deer, roar your loudest if you have to roar, keep them away from the road, no harm, no foul. Nobody gets hurt. And every morning driving, they take on that job. And I don't know if, I think I was setting an energetic, as I've learned now, but I was also trusting that my intuitive senses would remain alert, even though it was literally 5:15 in the morning in the darkness, to watch for deer on the side of the road. And there have been several times, not a lot, where I would catch a glimpse where I probably would not have seen it before. So that kind of practice is very, well, I love the fun of it. I love the mystical of it. But it also reminded me that I can activate those capacities in myself.
Yes.
by owning Jaguar energy. Another beautiful journey I had, we were learning about the facing death. And we went on a journey, and I was down in a cave, no light, no nothing. And all of a sudden there was an opening in the sky, a portal that I could see out of the cave, which was underground, up to the stars. And magically, a big jaguar appeared, stood up on his back feet, put his paws up to the hole, and I was able to climb him out. Well, I later learned that in this mythology, which I didn't know anything about, the jaguar is the rainbow bridge between the worlds. So here I was experiencing the mythology of this jaguar bridging something in order to carry me to a new place.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's interesting, metaphysically exciting, but it also can tap you into the energies of cosmologies of the Andes and of other cultures, because as you go into that collective conscious, as you go into those transpersonal realms, things will happen that bring meaning that you might not have ever known. So I just encourage the listeners, first of all, get Carl's book, because he's masterful at helping you work through a challenge and bringing about change. So his book is The Necktie and the Jaguar. And you'll probably remember his book, Change Your Story, Change Your Life. But just practicing those things can really bring a richness. So Carl, we have to close up, which is disappointing to me because I love hanging out with you. But thank you for your book, for sharing the wisdom of your journeys over the years, helping the people who read it learn to move ahead. And thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you for the conversation, Sharon, and for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. And this is Doc Martin on Maximum Medicine Radio. I'm here with Dr. Carl Greer. And remember, his latest book is The Necktie and the Jaguar. Thank you. You've been listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin. Tune in next time while the doc talks health, spirituality, and the impact your beliefs have on every part of who you are, body and soul. Doc Martin unpacks the challenges we face as human beings and teaches callers to open the door between the scientific and the mystical. To learn more about Doc Martin and Maximum Medicine, visit www.sharonmartinmd.com.